2.
And so
go.
So we're live, and this is only, I don't know, the second time maybe ever that I've bothered to do live media. I'm a record and publish later kind of person, and I have found in these two instances that I cannot resist saying the words "and we're live" at the beginning, even though when I hear other people say it, I think, what a waste of breath. Yeah, I get it. You're live. Continue. But something about it, I can't help myself.
Totally understand. Do we want to do some introductions for everybody? Do you want to introduce us or have us introduce ourselves, Jay?
Yeah, sure. Well, so to start with, since I'm new to your channel, I'm Jay. I produce a podcast called Best of the Left, and we're about to have a roundtable discussion that sort of centers on the show, but not too much, and sort of branches out from there. And the other voices you may be more familiar with. Skep, go ahead and take that away.
All right. Sounds good. And we're also joined by Jedi Ghost Bear. It's not who, full disclosure, is a personal friend of mine, and certainly glad to have you with us. Do you want to say a few things about yourself?
Yeah, I guess I'm 39. I got 5 kids. And I'm kind of a dentist under the internet. I went on there kind of because I had young kids and I had been people that were starting to get active. I kind of wanted to be ahead of the game there, and now I'm there full. I'm there a lot. So
excellent. And I'm the unlikely host of this because we had a little bit of trouble using some other tools. So we went with the StreamYard tool, and I have an account with them, one of those that you actually pay for. And so we're doing this. But Jay, I don't know how you usually conduct these types of roundtable. Do you want to put out the precise topics that you wanted to put up for discussion, or do you just want to talk generally about the discourse between left and right, and what the problems are and what the possibilities are?
So, well, as I said to you, just, on Twitter, as we were setting this up, the actual debate, the left and the right and all of that, I actually think is outside the purview of this conversation, or at least it would be my preference.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
This conversation only came about because of what I see as wild misunderstandings that happen on Twitter, and I thought, let's experiment with having a conversation instead of trying to make any progress on Twitter. My theory being, when people actually talk to each other, they have a much better time understanding each other, and so that's kind of the direction I'd like to go. Focus on, how discourse goes wrong, using our conversation as a bit of a case study, and then just sort of let it flow outwards from that as a starting point. If that sounds all right. I mean, one of my first questions for you both is whether or not you have a goal for this conversation. I mean, and given what I just said, I don't know if it would change your goal. I mean, do you have a thought of what you're hoping to get out of this?
I do, but you go first, Ghost Bear.
I'm sorry. I'm still getting used to the whole lifetime thing. I've never done it before, but I don't know. I guess just to hopefully we can just be clear about which each other's views and worldviews are. Is kind of my goal for it. I think that's, if we're not being clear, I don't think we're being fair. And the only reason why we're here is because I kind of came in hot at Jay, fairly or unfairly, through my kind of perceived. Jay's kind of in an unfair situation here because he knows nothing about Skep and I, and I'm at least a listener of the show, mostly. And this is great for Jay. I do really enjoy the show, even if I tend to come away with it, kind of angry, because what you talk about and bring up on the show is I see in the main discourse 6 months, a year down the line. And so you're kind of ahead of the curve on that stuff, which is why I appreciate your show. The problem is that where that goes 6 months, a year ago, I don't necessarily always think is healthy, which is why I kind of came in hot like I did, because I think there's blind spots on the left and the right, big picture wise, that neither one really see. And I can kind of explain my rationale that as the conversation goes, if it comes up. But that's kind of my goal, is kind of clarity.
I think that's a noble objective. In addition to clarity, one of the things that seems to characterize the discussions between people on the left and people on the right are somebody comes up and says, I think blah blah blah. And the other person says, oh, that's because you think blah blah blah. As soon as you take that thought and slap it on your opponent in a debate, the stage is set for a kind of he hit me first sort of a fight, and things degenerate from there. I'm tired of that. I am so done with that. What I would like to see come out of this is conservatives and libertarians. Oh, that's another thing. Let me just pause it and make a comment about the Axis of Disagreement. I think there are actually three axes in politics these days. There are conservatives, there are liberals, and or progressives. They prefer to be called conservatives, progressives, but then there are the liberty-seeking folks who agree on many cultural issues with the left, but on a lot of the country-specific, what you might call patriotic issues, they agree more with the conservatives. So they tend to want strong borders and legal marijuana. And I think we need to preserve that idea of that paradigm in our minds, and remember that just because somebody disagrees with a conservative doesn't mean they're progressive, and just because someone disagrees with libertarian doesn't mean they're conservative. It's a little bit. We have to be a little bit more careful in both defining our terms and stating our positions. The other thing I'm hoping for is, but in fact, overall is an objective. What I'm hoping for is an atmosphere in which there is a legitimate desire for understanding between both sides, between all three sides, the way I look at it, where people are constructively going in. I mean, somebody comes to me and they're an intelligent person. I talked with Jay for 5 minutes now, and I can tell he's an intelligent guy. How does an intelligent guy come to the conclusion that a strong federal government should form the leadership of a nation, as opposed to a libertarian who believes that the government should be quite small, and that individual effort and the initiative of the population should form that leadership, as opposed to the conservative who believes in a smaller government, but still government leading the nation, but providing a lot of freedom to create and innovate. So, how do people get to that point? So if we wanted to kick this off, might be fun to just ask Jay. I would ask Jay, how did you come to believe the things that you believe about political and cultural issues? What influenced you, and what assumptions and beliefs have you accumulated? Share them with us, and I'll do the same.
Yeah,
I just suggest that as a format.
Yeah, I mean, possibly. I might counter with a different proposal. First, I'll tell you my goals. So my goal for this conversation, I'm keeping my expectations very low. My goal is that we leave this conversation with the two of you considering me a fool rather than a liar. If that, because
I don't think you're a fool.
Well,
I think I might disagree with you, and we may have some disagreements about
no,
fundamental
that's fair.
things, but there is no way I'm going to walk away from this thinking you're a fool.
I know. I'm
Yeah,
being a little facetious. As David,
Yeah.
mentioned, he came in a little hot on me on Twitter, not for the first time, I believe. And
No, not for the first time. No.
And what has happened in at least the two instances I can recall are that, when I explain myself, I seem to not be believed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, let's have a conversation and see if we can make progress. I'm gonna come at your question from a different angle, and we're gonna, I think, get to the same place.
Okay.
A question that I wanted to ask both of you, and I have my answer ready. I could give mine first if you like. Is what your core political philosophy is, if you have thought of how to distill it into a, few words or a sentence, or, if you have a simple answer to that question, I'm curious what it is.
Go ahead.
Or perhaps,
give me an example of the answer that you want.
That's fair. No, that's totally fair. So my answer is to reduce suffering.
Okay.
And I find that my political opinions, the policies I tend to agree with or want to pursue, stem from that as its source, as sort of
you judge those philosophies and those principles to reduce the suffering of people who ostensibly currently suffer, right?
Yeah, and it's
Okay.
I mean it's such a broad concept. It can be applied,
Mhm.
almost anywhere, and it serves as a good foundational test
Mhm.
against, almost anything that can be proposed. Will this increase or decrease suffering broadly, and to who and how much? And it leads to lots of other more specific questions, but that's kind of what I think of as foundational for myself.
Mhm. Okay. That's noble. It's very general. That's my take on it, and I think that's what you want, is a very general statement. So reduce suffering. If I was going to distill mine out, I can't make mine that short. Mine's going to be a couple of sentences long. Is that still okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right. What I would
I
like.
guess one of the things that animate me. Oh, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Sorry. No, I was gonna say, one of the things that really animates me is where do we, if I could tell it down, is there's kind of two ways of organizing people. You can either do it through cooperation, or you can do it through, coercing people. And so for me, the thing that animates my politics is the reduction of coercion. Now, you can't eliminate it completely, and you shouldn't, because there's a reason why we have speed limits. There's a reason why we have, laws against, various, you can't lean so heavily on cooperation that you eliminate coercion completely. But what is the right and proper place for coercion? And that should be as small as possible. I guess that's my motivating principle.
So if we really reduced your principal statement, it would be to reduce coercion and promote cooperation.
As much as feasible, while still
as much
as
is reasonable within common sense dictates, right?
Yeah, as much as reasonable.
Okay.
Yep.
Now,
I would agree.
I'm sitting here with a conservative and a progressive who don't disagree with each other. Let me ask you something, Jedi. Do you want to reduce suffering or no? You want more suffering?
Oh,
would that be cool?
Absolutely. But I think the best means of going about that is through cooperative means.
Explain.
Well, what I mean by that is, I guess another way of putting it is more voluntary means. I think that when you centralize authority, okay, well, I'll give you here's a great example. I think of something about reducing suffering. I have no problem with the idea of a universal basic income as a replacement for all of the vast apparatus we have right now. And the reason why is because if I think we guarantee everybody a certain poverty level, I believe individuals will be able to make their own choices, and also free associations to get above that point. When you have a government involved, then government gets addicted to the strings, the pulling of the strings, and the manipulation of the strings, and it just becomes a self-perpetuating problem with a bureaucracy on top of it.
Okay.
So does that make sense?
Does. Here's what I detect from both of you. It reminds me of something that one of my professors said to me. He said the difference between, at the time he was using conservative and liberal, the difference between a conservative and a liberal is that a liberal, they both want the same things. They want all the same things, good things for everybody. Okay. But the liberal wants it right now. Don't care about the cost. Don't care how much debt we go into. Don't care whose rights we step on. We've got to alleviate the suffering now and, get everybody and raise everybody up, raise everybody's ship, no matter what it takes. Conservatives, on the other hand, he said, are content to let evolution raise all the boats and the development of society and the continued progress of intellectual and industrial process and social processes develop into a better world. Conservatives are content to let that happen on what they consider to be a more natural basis, paying their debts as they go. Okay, so they are content with a slower rate of progress toward all these good things, the alleviation of suffering, all the good things that everybody agrees that they want. Everybody wants to alleviate suffering. Everybody wants progress and success and happy children and healthy relations with our neighbors and cooperative ventures and so forth. And if you look at the world writ large, in spite of everything, we really are making a lot of progress. If you consider what the world was like in the 19th century, okay, even in places like Europe and America, there were people starving to death in the late 19th and early 20th century in the United States, people dying of starvation. There was simply no way to, there was no food for them. There were no resources made available to those people. And that really doesn't happen anymore. If you starve yourself in America, if you starve to death in America, it's because you're trying to. Pretty much. You can always get something to eat. You can always find a place to sleep. You can, the basics are much better covered. And one of the hopeful things I think that has happened, and this drives conservatives crazy, but I see this as a whole hopeful sign, is as badly as it was done, Obamacare was a really good-hearted attempt to raise the basic level of what people could expect from a society. In addition to food, shelter, having a place to, the things that will keep you alive, this was going to keep you well. And I think that was a noble cause, and it was absolutely it was botched, basically. Essentially, it was botched, and there are a lot of reasons it was botched. It's a hideously complicated Gordian knot of kite twine. What happened with Obamacare and why it had the problems that it had, but it still reflects a very noble notion on the part of the people here to make things better, to alleviate suffering, to afford the chance for prosperity to more people. And that, as a libertarian, as a capitalist and libertarian, that's what I want to see too. Now, I'm more tuned to the idea that we live in a world of scarce resources. Those resources are going to be allocated a certain way. And I think of those resources as mostly seed corn. A little bit of it is feed corn. If anybody who comes from a farm knows what I'm talking about, seed corn and feed corn. But most of that is to be, most of the capital and resources that belong in a society should be invested in further development, because further development is what creates wealth. Wealth creation is much retarded in a socialist or a communist environment. Look at just look at the GDP numbers between the United States and the Soviet Union for years and years and years. Look at any socialist nation, you'll see much flattened growth curves compared to individual industries in the United States. You just don't. And it's that individual initiative, that desire on an individual's part to work extra hard to get that reward, to have the freedom to go out and do that. It's not purely an intellectual reward, which is the assumption of socialism and communism, is that this person will do what he does no matter what he is paid. Okay, Thomas Edison would have invented the phonograph no matter how much he was paid. And that's for example, that's the philosophy in North Korea. In North Korea, did you know that every single person in that country is paid exactly the same salary? Did you know that? Did either of you know that? Be truthful. Did you know that?
Nope.
You didn't. I can tell.
Could I just say that I feel like we're several minutes off topic at this point.
I was so sorry.
I was really hoping you were going to get to your core political philosophy.
Okay, and so in conclusion,
continue from
my core political philosophy is that resources need to be managed intelligently and with a certain amount of both circumspection and understanding, compassion. And balance the allocation of those scarce resources in a society between the growth of the wealth of that society and the welfare of the citizens of that society. How about that?
Yeah,
balance, striving for balance.
Striving for balance. Fair enough.
And
boy, it's sorry, it's been a while. David, say again what yours was.
To reduce coercion.
Coercion. Exactly. No, I completely remember. So what I have been looking for an opportunity to talk to libertarians about, and I still want to get to our confusion after this, but on the topic of sort of political philosophies, to compare what the three of us said, it might not sound that far off. I said reduce suffering, David said reduce coercion, and Skep, you said like these are pretty similar things, right? Like Dave, you also want to reduce suffering. So like we're not even at disagreement, but the big sort of flashing bright lights of difference that I see is, between myself and I think both of you, is that yours tends to be a philosophy first, results second framework, whereas mine is a results first, philosophy second framework, if that makes sense.
I might actually
You just agreed with me.
That.
You just agreed with me hardly. That's exactly what I was saying when I was talking about what my professor said. The progressives want.
I think I might even go deeper than that, Jay.
When I say first,
I
mean your professor was talking about urgency,
and
I'm not talking about urgency. I'm talking about
I'm sorry
about your process of decision making. Step one, step two. Step one is first. That's what I mean. And so, like, just here's a quick example I thought of today. We all live in the US. We drive on the right side of the road. Anyone who's taken a driving safety class knows that it's safer to turn right than to turn left, because when you turn left, you have to cross traffic, right?
Yep.
You could then decide to have a right turn philosophy and say, I'm going to be the safest driver I can be, so I'm going to be I have a right turn philosophy of driving.
Going avoid risk no matter what.
Sure.
Okay.
So I would call that a philosophy first, results second style of driving. I would argue that I'm going to be a safe driver. I have a safety philosophy first.
Why does one have to be first? That's the thing I keep running into when I parse what you're saying. Well, why does one have to be first? And the other one
think
has
it's
to be
even deeper than that, guys.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's even deeper than that. I think the one of the things I've been appreciating is I've listened to a lot of Tom Holland, historian who wrote Dominion, and also years ago I listened to a lecture from Larry Hurtado, who's a biblical scholar, really good. One, he wrote Destroyer of the Gods, which is what made Christianity distinct in the Greco-Roman world. And I think how it applies here is that the fundamental difference is, I think, religious, actually, which is part of the reason why I came in so darn hot. I think it's religious in the sense that well, how do I explain this shortly? I don't think fascism is a living political option right now, even though it's usually termed on the right wing. I don't think that's accurate. I don't think it fits on the political spectrum at all, to be honest, in the modern day. Frankly, because I think it was an anti-Christian philosophy, whereas I think if we look at like the most traditional kind of political apparatus, it's kind of a divine right monarchy, which, now obviously I don't want that. I'm not that conservative. I have friends who are, but I'm not there. That would be kind of the most hardcore right wing you could go, and the most hardcore left wing you could go would be a communist one. And fascism is still around, whereas fascism died out. And even modern fascists, they're not really fascists in that sense. They or to the extent they do, they also reject Christianity. That's one of the things Tom Holland brings up is what excuse me, conservatives tend to be a little bit more Augustinian, and even left wing, even if they're not religious at all, are still animated by a Christian worldview, and it tends to be more Pelagian and very Pelagius. I don't know if either one of you are familiar with who Pelagius was. Whereas Augustine was very kind of grace oriented, and that we all are kind of just have to suffer through and muddle through this world, this temporary world right now, and by the grace of God. Pelagius thought that you needed to be as moral as you possibly could, and then only then would Jesus redeem you, after you have lived a perfect life, or as much of a perfect life as you possibly could.
This is the old grace versus deeds thing, but I'm concerned that you're getting far away from what Jay invited us to talk to him about.
Yeah, well, and to answer the question about, why,
Being
why does
long-winded,
one,
but I think that is kind of the real animus, is religious, and it's not seen by either side, because I think right and left are playing out kind of their own eschatology, their own kind of end times prophecies, that is not necessarily healthy. So that's kind of what I was trying to get back to. So yeah, you're right. You're right, Skep. I'm sorry, I got a little bit there.
It's important to keep the principles and the players separate. It probably is worth saying a word about this, just kind of a PSA moment. Look, there are certain odious people, I think, on both sides, who profess to leadership positions and have been in leadership positions. I think attacking them, calling them names, is not going to be productive. I think we really need to stick to principle and keep personalities out of it. The other thing is, you use the term fascist, and that's a loaded term. Fascism to me means it's a political philosophy that where it's nation over individual. It has a centralized autocratic government, that's usually headed by a dictatorial leader or an oligarchical group with one strong man in it. And it has a lot of social and economic regimentation, and it does not tolerate opposition. So that to me is what qualifies as fascism, just off the top of my head. But I'm concerned that we not get into name calling. If you characterize something as fascist, any time somebody thinks that opposition to an idea has been oppressed, they can say that's fascism. Anytime a strong leader with very strong views that are diametrically opposed to his own rises, they can say, well, that's an example of fascism. And the government is autocratic because they won't, they did this and I thought they should have done that. So I would keep terms like, fascism and I would use them only in their cardinal meaning, in their orange Catholic.
Right, I was trying to do that. I wasn't trying to make it as a pejorative or a label on anybody.
Yeah, pejorative in a non-pejorative way. So anyway, that's my PSA.
Yeah.
Jay,
that wasn't my goal.
Jump in there.
Well, I mean, I was still attempting to answer, the question I was asked, that, why does it matter which comes first? Or, in my little example of philosophy versus results focused thinking. And I would argue that one thing is always going to be the prime mover. One thing is always going to come first.
Why would you, what makes you argue that? That's what I'm interested in.
Well, I suppose another way to look at it, and maybe this.
Why does one preclude the other at the same time is what I'm saying.
Why does one preclude the other?
In other words, you say one has to come first. It must preclude the other. Otherwise, you could have them both at the same time, and one would not have to come first. It's a fundamental logic.
Right, and so I'm going to attempt a different way of saying the same thing, which is about prioritization, and it is going to be an inevitable factor in the way we think about policies or organizations of governments or anything along those lines.
Sure.
So we are going to be weighing different factors that are in tension with each other.
Sure.
And at some point we are going to have to make a decision about what to prioritize. And so what I started by saying is that my sort of core political philosophy is to reduce suffering. And that is the point from which my other thinking branches. And my interpretation of libertarianism generally, often broadly, conservatism generally, and everything that's been said in this conversation has sort of been backing that up. I mean, you haven't said anything that's that's been contrary to my preconceived notions is that there's a philosophy first,
Mhm.
meaning that a decided upon philosophy, for instance, reduction coercion, is the prime mover for David. It was the example he gave.
Mhm.
I would argue that that is not really as deep as you could go, because there is a simple question: why? Why is coercion something to be avoided? I think that suffering
Why?
is self.
Oh.
No, let him
I
finish.
was just going to say that I
Oh, no,
think
no,
that
sorry. I thought
suffering is self-evident enough as a thing to be avoided. I think that you believe that coercion is self-evident enough to be a core, a principal philosophy. And I would argue that that's extremely debatable.
Can
even-
you give us
Oh.
can you give us a definition, your definition of coercion? That might even be more helpful.
My definition, I mean,
Yeah.
I would just point back to what David said. Is he said that his core philosophy is to oppose coercion, but then went on to say, of course, you can't oppose it in all cases. We have to have speed limit laws and so forth. So he's already acknowledging that there has to be some minimum level of coercion, and therefore it's just a conversation about where that level should be. And so it doesn't really matter what my definition is or his is. His definition of his core political philosophy is built on something that we are already having a debate about. It's already a debate naturally about, okay, there's no such thing as zero coercion. There is some amount, and now we're trying to decide where to put that line. And I think that is problematic. I think that's problematic as a political philosophy, and why I think libertarians and conservatives end up in supporting bad policies that perpetuate unnecessary suffering, because they are coming at it from a philosophy first perspective and worrying about the results second. They prioritize thinking, well, what I know for sure is that my philosophy is right, and the results.
I'm making God happy today. It doesn't matter what happens to people as a result, as long as I make God happy or stay faithful to the conservative philosophy. Devil take the poor. Let them do for themselves. That's basically the way that you see conservatives.
Well, I mean, that's
I mean, is that fair? Am I being unfair? Tell me if I am. I'm asking the question: is that how you see conservatives?
Well, I don't get into theological analogies. That's just like so far away from the world.
I was using that as a device.
No, I understand that you were. It's just, so yeah, that sounds about right, but that's also not how I talk. And so there's wiggle room for maybe you mean something slightly different than I'm interpreting. That's all.
Say, Jay, can I ask a question real quick? So one of the things I'm asking, how do you account for and worry about unintended consequences of trying to reduce coercion? Or not coercion, sorry, reduce suffering.
Yeah. I mean, I believe in experimentation. I believe in argumentation. I believe in all of the things that you would do to try to avoid bad outcomes. I don't believe in the political philosophy equivalent of Facebook's standard message about moving fast and breaking things. That's I mean, I feel like a lot of the things I believe in have actually been tried and tested for decades. I really don't have any interest in getting into a policy debate with the two of you, but universal healthcare, which I would guess neither of you are in favor of, doesn't matter if you are or not. That's not a new thing. That's not something that hasn't been tested. It's been used in countries around the world, we can see the results and compare them to ours. And so
Yes.
that's an example of not jumping into the unknown, but the argumentation against universal healthcare in the US, which I think is so often dishonest or based on profound ignorance, sort of makes the claim that, well, there's almost no possibility other than for things to go badly, but you'd have to ignore the results in other countries to come to that conclusion, in my perspective. So I bring that up only as an example of that's something that I would like to do that in no way is untested, or we are unsure of how it could work or anything like that. And so
Sure, but those do involve trade-offs that we have to decide whether or not we want to do. And not every universal healthcare system is the same. And a lot of the times,
sure,
I kind of hear, advocates of people who are friendly to your side will give like the Canadian system or the British system and won't look at others, and they won't, to my mind, honestly talk about trade-offs and the trade-offs that wouldn't necessarily have to take place. In order to put that just as a way, that is one of the things that I see as coercive, is you're trying to sell me that something that's going to involve trade-offs. You know it's going to involve trade-offs, but you're not honest and straightforward to me about what those trade-offs that you expect to be, and which kind of goes back to, how do you account for unintended consequences? When one side is kind of saying, no, it'll be great, and then people who kind of get caught short on some sort of, on that trade-off, justifiably get mad about it. So that's why I kind of go back to, how do you account for unintended consequences? Yeah, we can pick. I'll leave it there.
Well, when I think of an unintended consequence, I think of something that comes as a surprise, and what you're describing is something that can be known, and then it's just a matter of having an honest debate. So you're talking about dishonest debate, which I see as distinct from an unintended consequence.
A clear person may not. They can be an honest broker and not be aware that the position they're advocating for involves trade-offs.
Yeah, of course.
Because they've been misinformed. So that's kind of where I was going at. And not necessarily. I mean, there are people who clearly should know better, who advocate for a British style NHS system, perhaps, that are not honest brokers in that discussion. Then there are that, but then there's also the people who I interact on a regular basis who have just been misinformed. They're not coming at it from a dishonest place.
Yeah,
they're just not aware person of individuals.
Yeah.
So
at this point, I recommend we take a step back from the brink of policy debate, and
solid idea.
Sure.
I would like to just put the cherry on the little analogy that I was trying to use to explain what I was saying about the rights turning versus safe driving safely, because it's an analogy of coercion, or or freedom, or whatever phrase you might want to put in its place, that having a turning right philosophy is a pretty decent way to be a safe driver, but having a safe driving philosophy will lead a person to turn right quite often, but it will also guide you to find the exceptions, right? Like, there are times when turning left is safer. It's literally safer than turning right because of any number of circumstances that could arise where turning right means, doing something strange or, really overly complicated or whatever. It doesn't, the details don't matter.
But you're talking about elimination of risk as opposed to risk management.
No, I'm not talking about elimination of risk.
If you only turn right, you're saying I'm going to eliminate the risk of turning left. Would you go that far?
Well, But I think
Are
that's
you eliminating the risk of turning left by only ever turning right? Yes or no?
well, I guess you're eliminating the risk of turning left, but you're opening yourself up to risks that come with turning right in instances when you shouldn't. Which is the point I'm trying to make, is
Oh,
that
okay.
having
I
a
see.
sort of
I get you. I
yeah,
see where you're going.
having
Okay.
a rigid philosophy of I turn right because it's safer will
Right.
inevitably at some point lead you to turn right at a time when it is less safe to do that. Whereas having a safe driving philosophy will lead you to turn right much more often,
I
but
couldn't
you will
agree
always
more.
be on the lookout for the
Yeah.
exceptions when it is genuinely safer to turn left. And so if you
Yeah. Good point.
apply
Good
that,
point. Point well
so
made.
if you apply that to coercion, if you
Mhm.
start with we'll use mine, a reduce suffering philosophy, one of the things you will end up being in favor of a huge amount of the time is being against coercion, because coercion is an aspect of suffering. It can lead to suffering when you coerce people to do things they don't want to do. And so a philosophy of reduced suffering will lead to great amounts of freedom and a lack of coercion, but it will help guide you in deciding when coercion is worthwhile because the benefits outweigh the downsides of the coercion. Whereas I would argue having an anti-coercion philosophy first will lead you to policy positions or thought conclusions where you will inevitably come up against a scenario in which it is genuinely better to introduce coercion for a better outcome, but you will be blinded by that or blinded to it because you will be considering your anti-coercion stance first and the results of your decision secondarily.
I don't think there's any problem. I don't think any of us truly have any issue with what you just stated in principle. The problem is when you apply this to the actual issues and you have to decide how much coercion is appropriate. And I'm not trying to strawman anything here, but I'm just saying, for the vaccine mandate is a good example, I think, of government saying, we've got a big problem. We've got to do something about it. We are going to essentially infringe on your First Amendment rights because we've got to do something about this illness that is killing lots of people all across the country. The how much coercion?
Well, I would say
is a
that say, two rights don't make a left, but three do. To kind of make a pun on an album cover from way back when. You could still get to making that left-hand turn, in a careful way that is aware of unintended consequences, that involve coercion. Whereas if you always look for that one, exception to the rule, you can start seeing exceptions everywhere.
So you're saying that I'm viewing the vaccine mandate as an exception to the First Amendment, and you're concerned where that would stop, right? If we can prevent, hang on, listen to me just for a second. If we can prevail upon the First Amendment for this much, what about this next good purpose that comes up where government wants to get people to all do the same thing at the same time? And maybe it's not an epidemic. Maybe it's not a pandemic. Maybe it's just supporting a particular social program. And they say, and the government says, you have to show your support for our position by wearing a plastic band on your wrist or something like that, or you can't leave your home.
Can I just point out that the slippery slope argument is by far the most frequent argument I hear from libertarians, and it is classified literally as a logical fallacy.
It is not a lot. It isn't. You can't. You
I mean,
no. It can lead to logical fallacies. I can go that far, but I would disagree with you that anytime you say that something could get worse, it's a logical fallacy. That's just nonsense.
I mean, sure, there's going to be like some gray area.
Things get worse sometimes. They just do.
No, yes, but the argument to base an argument on, but what if the thing you want to do turns into something else is as a Canadian listener of mine said about universal healthcare, if universal healthcare, one of the arguments against it is the slippery slope argument. I guess we slid down the hill and landed nicely on a platform, a short distance down. Like the arguments that, let's start taking one infringement that is arguably justifiable and then start worrying baselessly about infringements that wouldn't be justifiable. I just think, like, you're right. Isn't that what politics is for? The whole point of every discussion about politics is to decide what we consider justifiable and what we don't. And so to argue,
no, I agree with you there. Yeah.
Yeah. So to argue against things that are justifiable for fear that they would lead to something unjustifiable, I consider a logical fallacy. And the most frequent one I hear.
But I mean,
that's a much more nuanced position than what you said.
Yeah. But if we, like, to take it to a different, if we had worried about unintended consequences with, say, the Patriot Act, would we be with the security state we have now? Because I think
David, you're having a little bit of a bandwidth problem where you're cutting out. We can't hear you. Yeah. You're cutting out every once in a while.
Yeah. I mean, I heard the Patriot Act come up. Oh, we lost him. I heard the Patriot Act come up. That's definitely going to be one of those areas where progressives and libertarians have a lot in common. That's not surprising to me at all.
Patriot Act just runs all over me.
Yeah. So, like that would be one of those things where, that's exactly the kind of thing that you should be extremely concerned about, throw a fit about, have a big open debate about, make sure.
But my argument, hey, you just, thank you, Jay. My argument against the Patriot Act is that is a slippery slope argument. That's going to be misused. And it's going to be misused. I mean, because government can't help itself. Government is made up of human beings, and human beings, above all, I believe, are motivated by a desire to reduce the uncertainty of the future. I mean, there's a whole part of psychology that is devoted to that paradigm, and giving politicians a tool like the Patriot Act, okay, so they can go and look at things that they shouldn't be looking at, that completely abrogates the privacy arguments that extend from the Fourth Amendment, is that's a slippery slope argument. That's an example of a slippery slope argument, but it supports you and it's comfortable to you, so you don't think of that as a logical fallacy. And that would be my example of why a slippery slope argument isn't always a logical fallacy. It can be, but it isn't always, and it isn't by definition.
I honestly don't know. I mean, I'm trying to project back, 10 or 15 years to my original thought, the Patriot Act, and I'm not sure that my primary concern was that it was going to be misused and go beyond its bounds, although I don't disagree with that.
What didn't you like about it?
No, I mean, I think I might have disagreed with it as stated. That
just qua the argument.
Yeah. here's what you're
Patriot Act,
proposing.
qua Patriot Act.
Yeah.
I'm not unsympathetic to that. I think that's a little bit of an emotional argument, but I'm kind of on board with it, so I don't mind. Yeah, maybe.
Well,
anyway, let's not agree violently. We're here to disagree.
Yeah,
So,
I guess. Yes. So before we hit the 1 hour mark, shall we talk about what we came to talk about?
Sure.
So,
lead on.
Fair enough. So what started all of this is that the tagline for my show, the show is Best of the Left. The tagline that I added on a couple of years ago to describe it is progressive politics and culture, curated by humans. And so, David, you tweeted at me saying that the tagline of Best of the Left, curated by humans, implies those who don't agree aren't authentically human. Am I framing that correctly?
Well, but it was also attached to a tweet from Adam Friended that said, I'm going from memory, I don't want to lose you guys again, but it was that shoot, what did it say? It was about forcing others to conform to your own political worldview is also authoritarian.
Sure. And so you interpreted my tagline as falling into that category?
No, it's a little unfair for you because you have a show that I listen to. So it was that tied to your larger body of work that I found certain aspects of your shows in recent months I have found to be dehumanizing to people outside of your ideological sphere. So that's why I was tying it that way.
Right. And I just want to I don't know if we'll get to the bottom.
Which is not fair to you.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll get to the bottom of the dehumanization question, but the examples you gave on Twitter, I found, and as I said, it sounds like we have different definitions of dehumanization, and I don't know if we're going to get that sorted out. But so that, as squishy as that little exchange and series of answers was.
Well, maybe if I give you an example of what I was of what my concern is, and then maybe that'll help clarify things.
Sure.
For instance, after the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict, a lot of the commentators on that show would deal with the Kyle Rittenhouse not as an individual, but as an abstract reinforcement of patriarchy or white supremacy or what have you. And it does seem to be a trend amongst, and not just, I'm not saying you specifically, but a lot of the commentators you choose to have, commentate on the show will treat ideological opponents as an abstract embodiment of some, thing in the ether and not as individual people.
Do you think that any level of structural thinking applied to individuals is justifiable?
Sure, except if there's a line where it's consistently applied to one side and not the other. Where if your side has all the nuance and the other side is just an abstraction, that is othering and a dehumanizing act, specifically in my view.
Okay. I mean,
you probably disagree with me on that, but that is where I was coming from.
Well, I mean, I sort of disagree that like people on the left have all the new, or like all people on the left are nuanced. I mean, I think of people on the left as also structurally created and that their perspectives have been formed by experiences and all of that. So I don't see my political opponents as unnuanced. I see them as structurally created and nuanced, which is not really different than how I see people I agree with.
That was going to be my next question. Okay. Yeah, I don't see a difference in how you view both sides. That's a very attractive characteristic, by the way.
Well,
that's a good thing. And yeah, I'm the same way. I have 17,000 followers on Twitter. About a third of them are more liberal than you are.
Okay.
Okay. And we have disagreements. We have things we agree, disagree, and we don't mostly don't. And I for myself, I'm past it. Don't resort to name calling or ad homs. And if somebody does an ad hom, I don't care whose side they're on. I'll call it out. That's me being the grandfather.
Sure.
You kids stop fighting. I don't care who hit who. Stop it.
Mm-hmm.
And I really do feel that way. These are, modern society is dynamic and complex. It is filled with all kinds of hard to measure forces that come and smash together, some cooperatively, some antagonistically, and some there's no way to express the relationship between them. And it's not surprising to me, and I'm very patient with the human beings who disagree with one another, and with people who disagree with me. I want to hear what Jay has to say. I want to hear what Ghost Bear has to say that might modify, that might improve my view of the world, the lens through which I perceive all these the product of all these complex processes, and the thing that informs my attitudes when it comes to how I conduct my life and construct my belief set based on what I observe, right?
Mhm.
So that's why when I heard about the opportunity, I love the idea of talking to people who who certainly don't agree 100% with me with every political position that I have. Just from the standpoint of, here's a thoughtful, intelligent person who has worked hard, who has thought hard about these things. He's concluded something differently. That thrills me. I'm fascinated by that. I want to learn how you came up with that. And it's the difference between somebody like you and a Brian Stelter or a that Hannity guy uh, on TV, just empty, putting the slogans out there, putting the party line out there. Most of them are just completely thoughtless about that. And that's what people fill their heads with. They sit there and watch CNN. They sit there and watch Fox. That's where they get their news, and they begin to believe that, and begins to make them angry, and it poisons their mind. They become less receptive to an alternative point of view. And I think that's really the problem you wanted to attack today.
I suppose so. And so to bring you into like this particular issue that we're using, not because it's so important, but because I think it's an interesting lens. The one tweet I pulled of yours, Skip, is I had said something, I think, in response to Ghost Bear, that I saw my tagline as completely innocuous, and your response was, if you have to proclaim your tagline as innocuous, that's because it isn't evident from a casual reading, period, and it's not, period.
Yeah, and I what I should have said is that because it is not evident, and you're absolutely right. I wasn't trying to be offensive. I simply hit tweet. Simply hit reply before I read my own tweet, and I thought, wow, that sounds rather off-putting. What I really wanted to do was encourage introspection. That's all.
Yeah,
that's all that was meant to do. And I'm sorry that came off that way. And as a matter of fact, I'll remove that tweet.
Honestly, don't bother. My problem with it had nothing to do with whether it was off-putting or not. I didn't find it particularly off-putting. I didn't interpret it as snarky or anything along those lines.
It certainly wasn't meant that way.
No, I didn't interpret it that way. My question was just if that, basically accurately, describes your perception of a tagline curated by humans, that you came to a similar conclusion as Ghost Bear did, that it has deeper implications about
That's not an unreasonable conclusion on your part at all.
On my part or his?
That's not an unreasonable conclusion on your part at all. You reasoned logically. If I had read that tweet, I would have concluded the same thing.
No. I'm not asking my interpretation of the tweet. I'm asking your interpretation of my tagline. That's
read me your tagline again. I've slept since then, and I'm almost 70. So
sure.
And take it easy on the old guy.
No, that's fine. And again, just to emphasize, it's not because this topic is so important. It's not the tagline is important, but I find it revelatory or potentially revelatory. So the show title, Best of the Left, Progressive Politics and Culture, curated by humans.
Okay. Here's how that tagline hits me. Curated by humans. It sounds sly. It sounds like not like the other ones that are just, that do not have the level of humanity that this one has. I think that's what it's, maybe not sly, but at least subtly getting across. That's the way that I would interpret that.
And so then my follow-up question to both of you is, how familiar are you with algorithms and the role they are playing in modern society?
When you say algorithms, okay, you're talking to somebody who spent 30 or actually 40 years in information technology. I have great familiarity with algorithms used in programming. When you say algorithms, who designs these algorithms? What algorithms are they? Where are they written down? And what are the rule sets behind them?
Well, as I already laid out in response to Ghost Bear's initial tweets, I'm talking about the algorithms that run our social media platforms and our news feeds.
Okay.
That is what I'm.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought, but I did just wanted to make sure. Okay. What do I think about those algorithms? I think that they are tools, and they're very useful tools. The way that they are constructed sometimes reflect a lack of, frankly, maturity, particularly in part of Facebook, and also reflect they give in to their big money backers at the expense of fairness to all of their participants, because the people who give them money want to hear a certain point of view, and certain other points of view are unwelcome to them. And so they want to use those platforms to discourage those things. As a conservative on Twitter, for example, you have to really be careful about using swear words. If you use a swear word and you're in a Twitter argument with a person from a marginalized group, all they have to do is report you as hate speech. And you're done. You will lose your account, or you'll get a 14-day ban. That doesn't happen the other way. The reason is because they have chosen to come down specifically on the side of what passes for liberal discourse these days. And there is a real prejudice against the conservative and a growing prejudice against the libertarian points of view, because they're seen as in opposition to the progressive side. At least that's so you asked me my observation. That's my observation on those. The algorithms are tools. The difficulty that the people like Twitter and Facebook find themselves in is that they say that we will be, we will fairly represent what you type in. And then they say, no, you typed in something we don't like, so we're going to edit that or coerce you or, penalize you for your point of view. And
Yeah,
and
I
and
mean, I
in doing that, and they do it to a certain extent on the liberal side too. I mean, if you know, there are crazies on both sides. There are crazies on the progressive side too, and they get their ass canned too. The problem is that those public spaces have become almost like a utility, like an electric utility. We don't deny you electricity if you're if you watch Sean Hannity, for example. Okay, we don't require that that you watch Brian Stelter in order to have electricity. Why should they require that your points of view, the things that you express on their platform, be of a certain tone or tenor that uh, in order to continue to enjoy the access to that platform? It's, you know, you wouldn't like it if somebody turned off your electricity because they said you were too progressive, and that's what I see happening in social media. That it's kind of a much broader answer to your question you probably wanted, but you asked me what do I think of the algorithms. I think the algorithms are tools, and I think that they are used to occasionally ill purpose, generally good purpose, but occasionally ill purpose because of perception of the decision makers at those social media groups that the discussion needs to go a certain way.
Yeah. So my interpretation of everything you just said is that you started by saying that algorithms are tools and then talked almost entirely about concerns over censorship, which is essentially unrelated to the functioning of algorithms. And
The
that
algorithms are unimportant.
They're unimportant.
Yeah, the algorithms can be changed.
Okay, so
Algorithms can be changed. It's like programming. Algorithms are programming.
No, that's an excellent insight. I finally learned something about your thoughts on algorithms, that they are unimportant, which is incredibly important to this discussion we're having, and the fact that there was confusion between us. But I am curious about Ghost Bear. Like, where do you come down on the algorithms? Are you going to echo what Skep is saying?
Well, Skep knows a lot more about this subject than I do, but I think algorithms are pretty ham-fisted operations that are designed to give you what you want, and secondarily give you what the you know, when they think about it, what the powers that be of that particular whoever writes the algorithm is healthy, and that interplay, especially giving you what you want. That I think is where Skip's kind of going, where algorithms aren't necessarily important, because because it's, whether it's curated by a human or curated by an algorithm, you can still, give people what they want to hear rather than what they need to hear. Is what I'm trying to say. Humans are pretty good at figuring out how to sell stuff. I mean, that's kind of the, and that was curated by humans before algorithms came around. So I think, algorithms, they serve a specific function, but whether or not they are more or less important than, or how do I want to put that? More or less important in giving you what you want, to accomplish that goal, then I'm not sure, whether or not you can still get to the same bad end either way.
So what I would argue is that the algorithms are not programmed to give people what they want. They are programmed to give people what will keep them the most engaged on any given platform. And those are very different things.
I don't think that's mutually exclusive, though.
I'm sorry, say it again.
I don't think what you just said and what I said are mutually exclusive.
I'm not saying they're mutually exclusive, but I'm saying they're very different. I mean, something that keeps me engaged could be something that I want, but if I, have a sort of dark interest in watching a plane crash on YouTube, and then YouTube starts feeding me dozens of plane crash videos, I can assure you that is not what I want, but I may be susceptible to clicking on the next one as well, because, well, I was sort of interested in that first one, and maybe I'm in a dark mood and want to watch a plane crash. But given a blank slate and someone asking me, what would you like? My answer is not going to be plane crashes. And so when I talk about algorithms, it is the nature of algorithms to feed people what keep them engaged rather than not even what they need nor what they want. It's just about engagement. And so starting with that as the core truth of how these algorithms work, because the platforms are all, profit driven, they have, their, it's practically their fiduciary responsibility to write the algorithms in such a way that are not politically geared one way or the other. They're geared towards engagement, and engagement. There's a huge connection between high engagement and anger. And so what ends up being fed through the algorithmic system the most is that which makes people angry. And so when I write a tagline that says curated by humans, what I am signaling is I am not that. I am not that which an algorithm will feed you if you get your news from YouTube or Facebook or Twitter or some news feed that is funded by ad dollars or any of those things. That's the distinction that I was making, and the answers that the two of you gave about your take on algorithms, I think, is massively explanatory in why you would have such a wildly different interpretation of my tagline, since you don't put a high value on the algorithms. I mean, Skep, you describe them as tools that are essentially unimportant. That is hugely explanatory as to why you would read that, and there would be a gap there. You would think, curated by humans, what could that possibly mean? And then you would go into your own store of knowledge and information and perceptions and come up with the best possible answer you can. And you think, well, it sounds kind of sly. Which I don't disagree with, by the way. It is kind of sly, but you came to the conclusion, well, it sounds kind of sly. He's kind of making a dig at something. It must be other shows. It must be the other shows. But other shows are made by humans. So what does that dig mean? Well, I guess he's dehumanizing them. He's elevating himself above the other people. And
I think you're jumping to a conclusion there.
Exactly. And so what I see as probably a blind spot that the two of you may have in the realm of algorithmic news feeds is what caused the misinterpretation of my tagline that then escalated to, I thought, this is going to be the simplest thing in the world to explain. And when I explained it, the response I got from Ghost Bear was like, yeah, right. Like, you lie about things all the time. So, like, why should I believe this?
That probably wasn't fair. That probably wasn't fair, but I had my dander up.
All right, guys. Of course you were going to say something, too fast and too mean, because Twitter makes people do that.
I swear to God, it does.
I never go on Twitter for that exact reason. I mean, the times in which I have conversations on Twitter are like maybe once a year. I think the last time, maybe back in the summer when you said that my anti-racism was equivalent to David Duke, which was I enjoyed that one. Yeah. That was a nice little mental exercise for me to parse through what you were even trying to get at with that.
But you don't spend any time on Twitter. I find that very interesting.
Oh, no. Well, so first of all, I'm an introvert. I have no, social media has never been an attraction.
Not appealing to you, sure.
It's not appealing. And then secondly, once I realized how destructive social media sites were to other people, the sigh of relief I had in knowing that I did not fall victim to this by sheer happenstance, that I happened to not be attracted to it. Like, you can't imagine the relief I felt in knowing that I had dodged that bullet.
Can I ask you a question then?
Yeah, sure.
Another question. do you feel that social media is patronized only by victims of social media?
I mean, well, or another
It's
way
a
to say
fair,
that
isn't that a fair question based on what you just said?
you mean like, is there such a thing as a person who can use social media without being victimized by it?
Yes, exactly.
Perhaps not.
Yeah,
Perhaps
that's
not.
what I'm hearing. That's what I'm hearing is that you think that that's not possible.
I mean, if you were given an option to turn your news feed into chronological order rather than algorithmic, then we'd be having a discussion about there
I
being
actually agree with that.
no
I had to
victimhood.
think about what you meant, but yeah, I actually kind of agree with you. Although the problem there is it's too much information. You end up looking at atoms when you need to be looking at the thing. So
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, it's really hard.
yeah,
That's a hard problem.
it's a hard problem to solve, and I don't. I did not come prepared with. I mean, I have had thoughts, and I have heard people speak intelligently on these subjects. I mean, basically, it's you need to pull back from the granular and move all the way out to the corporate policy umbrella that governs these algorithms and rearrange the incentive structure on a fundamental level. And so
Mhm.
what that does ultimately to the granular level of how algorithms work, I don't know exactly, but I know that a profit driven motive tied to engagement, when engagement is highest when people are angry, means you are inevitably going to have an incredibly
Yeah.
toxic stew on social media platforms, which is exactly what we have.
Yeah, and then of course I don't know if you meant to, but you ended up calling out one of the chief bugaboos, the big problem with capitalism generally, with competitive capitalism, and that is suboptimization behavior by the players, where people do things that do not benefit the whole, and they if I was going to put a bow on all of this, I would say one of the biggest disagreements between the left and the right, leaving libertarians out of it, is that the um, the right believes that good things will happen if we just do these things, if we stick to these principles. And the left says, no, 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 we can see what needs to happen. Make this happen now. The problem with the right is they get tripped up by suboptimal behavior, and that acts as a retardant for growth of capital, and acts as an artificial prop for cost of capital and stuff like that. And on the left, they end up spending too much money too fast. They suboptimize themselves by not being careful enough. And sometimes they can't politically be careful enough in defining what a particular program or effort, what suffering that is actually meant to uh, ameliorate, because there are different people. That's the thing. The left and the right, but the left even more so, I think, is a heterogeneous bunch of people with a lot of different interests. The right's a little more homogenous, but the left is this bucket of people with a lot of very different points of view and different things that are important to them. And yeah, you actually start to see that, and you're starting to see a little bit of suboptimization by the left, even as they you hear the a Hispanic lobbying group saying, hey, this other marginalized group is getting more than Hispanics are getting. We want our rights, and that is classic suboptimal behavior.
I think part of like with, can I go back to the social media? I mean, part of the goal of why I came at Jay so hard is because I see, from my perspective, certain blind spots in his show and how he structures it. I didn't look at the Curated by Humans as being, because I've noticed on there for a long time. I interpret it as, I'm going to present you something very in depth that you're not going to get through an algorithm, which is going to be very shallow. That's how I interpreted it.
Well, that's not what you said.
That's how my long-term interpretation of it. The downside of that is when that's why I listen to the show. The reason why I said what I said was to put a rock in your shoe in order to uncover a blind spot, because I see, and I did it this summer as well. That was my goal. I don't know if I was effective or not. But that, when you say something like Curated by Humans and, it's progressive, if I were, let's invert it. And I did a podcast called The Best of the Right, conservative facts and opinions curated by humans. What would that say to you, Jay?
Well, it's just the mirror image of what I was describing and why we had a conversation about algorithms. It's all about what comes to mind when you're putting humans in opposition to X. What is X? My interpretation would be exactly the same. I would assume that they were talking about algorithms, because curation is what algorithms do. That is their job on social media platforms. So when you talk about curation by humans, my word association goes exactly to algorithms, because that's the other thing that curates. Humans curate and algorithms curate. And I'm not sure if anything else does. Those are the two options. So for that you two jumped to humans and subhumans is, I think, indicative of sort of the, it's indicative first of your perception of algorithms, so that they didn't come to mind for you, whereas they do for me. But it also is indicative of the incredibly low perception you have of me, honestly, that for you to think, I mean, I'll just say what I have to say, because I don't know how else to interpret it. For you to say, Jay thinks that he is an authentic human and those who do not agree with him are not, is a wildly offensive statement, right? Like if I were to believe that, that would be horrific, like really, really bad. And so the fact that you thought, well, I think this is what Jay thinks, means that you think I am capable of thinking and acting on something that I think we would all agree is horrific. And so that means that you're
unrealistic, by the way.
Which comes to what I think is a blind spot on your part. That's kind of the crux where we're getting at is, we are all capable of that, Jay. We're all capable of being that tribal and treating the other humans who interpret the world differently as subhuman, which is why, I think we're all capable of that. And if we think we're not capable of that, or we're somehow above it, then we're not conscious of our tendency to go that route.
So I appreciate you bringing in that level of nuance. I do. But so now we're getting to the point where, we started on Twitter when I said, it seems really clear to me that we have a different definition of dehumanization. So I am one of the people who does not believe that debates should be settled by looking up words in the dictionary. In this case, I'm just going to use this as one tool as part of the discussion. Definition of dehumanization, as pulled up on Google, is the process of depriving a person or group of positive human qualities. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, the way you described dehumanization earlier in this conversation was grouping people together, stripping them of their individuality, and in stripping their individuality, thereby dehumanize them. Am I basically on track with how you described it?
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I think I think
Um,
those things are very different from one another. I think that seeing people as members of groups and understanding group dynamics and understanding, systemic thinking and how we come to the beliefs that we do has nothing to do with depriving, what did it say? Depriving a person or group of positive human qualities. You brought up Kyle
See, that's where I
Rittenhouse, which
disagree
I
because
don't
I
want
think
to
it's better.
discuss. You could bring up any number of topics in which I discuss the topic systemically, talk about people as members of groups who are influenced by the group dynamics and the systems, related to, whatever issue is being discussed. And you could see that as dehumanizing, but what you really mean is it is stripping individuality. And I would argue that to strip individuality is necessary at times, or not to really strip individuality, but to see individuals as members of groups, and that is relevant to any conversation that's being had. I think that considering Kyle Rittenhouse as a member of a variety of groups is relevant to understanding the dynamics that led to his actions. I think that is incredibly justifiable. And
Right, but there's also a missed opportunity there, which I got frustrated when I was listening to the podcast because there were things done in that trial that I know have affected. Like, well, I don't know. I shouldn't say no in that sense, but I greatly suspect have been done to Black and brown defendants as well. Violating the Fifth Amendment, overcharging, not having things thrown out when clearly evidentiary they should be thrown out before trial even begins. That sort of stuff that I highly, I think you would probably agree, have been used against Black and brown defendants to a great degree. They get away with it because it's not highly publicized, or whatever. There was a point where we could have a minimum point of common ground there where we could use that as a springboard for positive change. But my view was that there were a great many on the left were just mad they didn't collect a scalp that particular day, rather than saying, "Well, look, there's a bigger fish to fry on this." So, but I do think, there's a time and place for looking at things systemically. But if you live there completely, the very nature of that will, bring you into, the holy side and the unclean side. And it ends up becoming religious. And the reason why I bring up religion is not because I want to really dwell on religion, but I think religion is at the core of a lot of these disputes. And I'm trying to be not. I don't want to try to advocate for any particular religion. I'm just saying when you get all the way down to the base level, I think it animates a lot of these disagreements.
Yeah, I really have no opinion on religion's role, and I think that I would argue that religion is
then I would call that as a blind.
Sorry, say again.
Then I would argue that as being a blind spot for you.
Well, I mean, sure. I grew up completely non-religious and don't have a lot of the background information about it. But I mean, I think I said on the show sometime recently that I agree with the premise that even non-religious people are affected by dominant religions because it's the water we swim in. It's unavoidable. So I happily acknowledge that Christianity, being the dominant religion in America where I grew up, has influenced my life and my thinking. I would say that. What I was going to say is that I think that religion is built on top of something else, though. I don't know. I mean, you're arguing that religion is sort of like some version of a cornerstone, and I'm saying that religion is also built on top of human psychology. And
you believe it's an intellectual construct. That's what you're trying to say.
I mean, sure, something along those lines. So basically what I'm saying is that's not the ground on which I would like to have a conversation, because it's not my wheelhouse. And also I don't accept the premise that it is probably foundational, because I think that something is
Okay.
very, very likely underneath it.
Okay.
But I mean,
I did mention 2 books that they've really influenced my thinking on that earlier, and maybe I can make that recommendation again, or I could tweet a link for those. So I think that would just background information. They're not particularly, advocating one side or the other, or trying to evangelize you or anything like that. It's not those type of books. They're history books.
Yeah. Sure.
So okay.
Have we run our course here?
I'm getting the feeling that the ends are splitting. We're tending to go way far afield from what our stated purpose was for getting together. And
I think we got there though.
But I think there were some good things said, and I got a lot out of this. I just like making another friend. Jay, it's a real pleasure to meet you and know you. I'll do all the Twitter stuff, follow you, and start listening to your podcast. So if this accomplished nothing else, this was the hardest you ever had to work to get one new listener.
Fair enough. Here's what I'll leave you both with, and I say this because of the dynamics of how this conversation started. That I did what I did. I run my show. I say what I say. I title it what I title it, and I felt misinterpreted, right? And hopefully we have gotten to the point where you have are at least willing to acknowledge my true intentions behind the title of the show and how that misinterpretation came about. And
moreover, I not just that. I'll go further. I'll listen to your show with an open mind. I hope it changes and improves my thinking. How about that?
No, that's more than fair. So what I'll leave you with is a realization that I had myself. This is not like me telling everyone else that they need to do something. This is a story about how I improved my own life and my ability to interpret the world in a way that is both more accurate and less irritating. I started being less angry at the world when I changed my mind about this. When I come across things that I do not understand, which happens plenty, I used to think, well, that doesn't make sense, and I am irritated by it. And then what will happen after that is one of two things. Either I never learn, why a thing is the way it is, why a statement was made the way it was made. It doesn't matter what. I'll either never learn and I'll continue to be irritated with my presumption, or I will learn why a thing is the way it is, and I will be shown to be incorrect. It will turn out, you know what? It actually does make sense. And now I know, but because of, human frailty and psychology, obviously that doesn't make me happy, because now I'm just wrong. I've been corrected, right? And so now I know the truth, but I'm still not happy about it. So that it's like a lose-lose scenario in that direction. The other direction that I have adopted more recently is to assume first there must be a good reason for this. There must be a good explanation that is not in any way horrifying for why this thing is being done or this thing is being said or whatever. And then you end up with a couple of choices. You either learn to your chagrin, no, that thing I didn't understand, turns out there really wasn't any good reason for it. And, now I can be disappointed a little bit, but I did my best, right? The other way is you then learn what the good reason was, and now you're allowed to be happy about it. You can then rejoice in having been right in your assumption that there was probably a good reason for that thing to be the way it is. It's a win-win. And so in this scenario, I would argue that what I would say is a incredibly bad interpretation of me and my actions resulted in you learning the truth and being corrected, but if you weren't overjoyed at that, I wouldn't blame you, because, oh, okay, now I see why I was wrong isn't like the most joyful experience to have. And so going forward, I would recommend, adopting this new way of thinking. It has done wonders for me and my mental health.
Sure.
Well-
No, thank you. And like I said, I should not probably have come at you as hard or as hot as I did. Shouldn't have called you a liar. That was not fair to you at all. Because I actually don't think you're a liar. And that's one of the things I appreciate about your show and why I listen to your show. Even if I do grit my teeth at the end of the episode. So I appreciate you, talking it out and being gracious enough to do that. I do appreciate that. I do appreciate the show. I do enjoy it. And that hopefully, I will not be nearly as hot, in the future, and try to be more constructive, than inflammatory, going forward. So I've had a good experience. I hope you have too.
I appreciate that. Don't lose the anger, though. It's good for my engagement.
Yeah. But on the other hand, I think there's a lot of, I think there's a lot in actually what you both said. And I would leave you with a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. In the long run, the most unpleasant truth is a safer companion than a pleasant falsehood. Can we all agree to that?
I think so. Took me a minute to process, but
in the long run, the most unpleasant truth is a safer companion than a pleasant falsehood.
Yeah.
Yeah. Send it there, guys. Thank you so much.
Sounds good.
Thanks for letting me provide my channel, and I'll spit the link to the recording out to you guys, and throw it around the internet, and we'll do it. But thank you for spending the time with an old man. It's a real pleasure to be with you both. And let's do this again sometime. Want to?
Maybe so.
All right. That's going to do it for us, guys.
For sure.
We're out of here, and thanks for being a part of this. And I almost said the zoo is closed, because that's what I do on my show. We're going to end the broadcast. Bye, everybody.